Today we're going to be filming how to R&R, which is remove and replace a transmission. And we're going to be working on this beautiful 72 Mustang Mach 1. So it has a 351 engine and it has the old FMX. It should be a simple conversion changeover from the old FMX into the C6 transmission. So we'll get this baby on the lift and we'll get started. And the first thing is we want to disconnect the battery so there's no power going down to the starter, because we will have to remove the starter from the transmission case in order to get it off the engine block. So we're going to remove the battery terminal, the positive terminal, right here, the red wire. You want to just loosen that up, disconnect it. Now we do have the transmission in neutral, so I can roll it back and forth to access taking the bolts off for the drive shaft. And I also have the wheels chocked for safety to make sure this thing doesn't roll off the lift on me. Now we're going to remove the dipstick out of the filler tube, and then we're ready to lift this car up and start taking it apart. All right, now we got this Mustang up in the air. First thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the starter, and then we're going to rotate the flywheel to remove the 4 nuts on the torque converter. Those studs are sticking through the flywheel, so we're going to have to turn the engine over, and we turn the engine over manually. To remove the starter out of the way, remove the first bolt, or nut I should say, of the stud. We're going to rotate the engine. Here, this is the actual drain plug for the torque converter. You do not remove that unless you're draining the converter. We're going to just remove this last nut. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in a drain pan, and we're going to remove the pan bolts on the transmission to drain the fluid out, so it's less of a mess when we have to handle this later. Fluid looked nice and red. The transmission was working fine. We're just going to update it with a better transmission. So now we'll put the pan back up with about 4 bolts. A bolt in each corner of the pan. The pan needs to be stable because we use the transmission jack. It's going to grip this pan to hold it on the jack. All right, we put the pan back on, tighten it all up. Now we're just going to roll the oil pan back about 1 foot or so, because we're going to remove the dry shaft, and then when we slide the dry shaft out of the transmission, some fluid will dump out from the tail. But a lot of times there's not much clearance to get a wrench in there. You can use a socket or something thinner, but we'll loosen up these nuts. Now, in order to rotate this around to access the other side, we're going to roll the car back to allow me to loosen or take out the other U-clamp. This car is heavy.
Oh man, you weren't kidding.
All right, now we access the other U-clamp. Then we would be careful removing the dry shaft, because those U-joints caps can fall off and all the bearings will fall out all over the ground. You have to find all those needle bearings, or you have to replace that U-joint. So now we're going to slide the dry shaft out of the transmission. Okay, now we're going to remove the 2 nuts for the transmission mount. We're going to remove the nut and bolt from cross member. So remove the cross member. Now we're going to remove the 2 bolts that hold the transmission mount onto the case itself. That should be 3 quarters as well. There's a cotter pin holding this into the linkage. So we're going to straighten out the cotter pin and remove it. And now the shifter, this goes up to the steering column to tell the vehicle when it's in neutral or park. This has been now removed. Now there's an E-clip on this side of the kickdown rod. We're going to remove that clip. All right, now that we got the lines disconnected, the coolant lines from the transmission, on this application we had to loosen the exhaust because of the clearance issue with the tail overlapping the exhaust. So we've loosened the exhaust from the manifold to give us more clearance to lower the transmission out. The other thing to keep in mind is, you know, all these cars have an emergency brake, and sometimes that brake cable will be underneath the tail. We got the exhaust drop, emergency brake line out of the way. We're slowly going to lower this down. Make sure that the torque converter studs are not hanging up in the flex plate, so they're free and clear. We're now going to roll this out from underneath the car, and we'll set up the C6 transmission and get ready for the install. The next thing we want to do before we install the transmission is to flush out the rest of the fluid that's still in the lines. So basically we're just going to get some air, and we're basically going to blow into this line. All right, I've reinstalled the engine block plate on the two studs on the back of the block. So we're going to reinstall this flex plate back onto the engine block. All right, now we got the transmission ready. This is the torque converter we're going to use. So what we're going to do, the first thing you would do is put some fluid in the torque converter. And the other thing we're going to do, we're going to put a little grease, a little trans gel here on the hub of the torque converter. When we install this on the transmission, we're going to rotate it clockwise several times, pushing in, and they're going to be pushing on it as we rotate. So what we want to install next, before we bolt it to the engine block, is to put the coolant lines on. You may have to flex or bend the line because it is a different transmission to get it to line up and start the threads. So now we're going to lift this up, line up the transmission case and converter with the block. Okay, the next area we're going to work on, I guess we'll do the converter nuts. Okay. We'll get them all on, then the starter, and then we'll work on this side for the linkage and everything. All right, we just finished putting in the dipstick. We put the last bell housing bolt in, bolting the entire transmission, all 6 bolts tight, nice and tight to the engine block. So now we're going to come to the front. We're going to make sure that the converter is free, which it is. We're going to start putting in each nut, and what we're going to do is we're going to put each one on and rotate the engine around until we tighten all 4 nuts. So now we're going to rotate the engine over to expose the next stud on the flex plate, just like we did before when we took it out. All right, we matched up the linkage positions from the FMX to this adjustable linkage arm that comes on our C6s. The problem here with this kickdown rod, I'd have to cut the case. Okay, we're ready to install the cross member. And now we can lower the transmission into place. The studs are lined up through the cross member. So we'll put the 2 nuts back on, mount. And now we removed the emergency brake tensioner. So we have access for the tail to slip over the cable. The cable's back on. And now what we can do is we can lift the exhaust back up to hook it back onto the exhaust manifold. Okay, we're ready to put the dry shaft in, but we just shortened the tubular portion here 4 inches, And now we're ready to put it in the transmission and lock it up with the differential. All right, we just finished the install on this C6 and this beautiful Mustang. It shifts great. The shift points are right on. If you need any more help or you're looking for a transmission for your vehicle, give us a call at Monster Transmissions, 1-800-708-0087. Looking forward to hearing to you then.